The Hartleys bought the elf on a gray, ugly Saturday after Thanksgiving, the kind of day when the whole suburb smelled like wet asphalt and burnt coffee. Laura hadn't planned on getting anything Christmas-related yet, but once they stepped into that giant store off the highway, packed with inflatable snowmen and plastic candy canes, the kids went feral. "Mom, look!" Tyler pressed his face to a shelf stacked with long, narrow boxes. "Hearth Elf, your holiday helper." The smiling elf inside had a stiff felt body, painted eyes just a little too shiny, and a grin that looked more like a smirk if you stared too long. "I want this one," he said. 5-year-old Emma joined in immediately. "Please, he can sit by the fireplace. We can name him Jingles." Ben wandered over with a to-go cup. "It's $5, he said. "If it keeps them from fighting, we're basically saving money." Laura laughed, but something about the doll's eyes bothered her. It looked like it was watching her, even through the plastic window of the box. Still, she tossed it into the cart. December exhaustion had already won. By the time they got home, the neighborhood was blinking with premature Christmas lights. Their house, once Ben's childhood home, now remodeled into something shinier, smelled like cinnamon candles and the artificial pine of the pre-lit tree. The kids positioned Jingles on the living room mantel, right beside the framed photo from July. The elf sat cross-legged, head slightly tilted, painted pupils fixed in an upward stare. "Perfect," Laura said. "He can watch the tree." That night, after the kids fell asleep, Laura wandered through the quiet house, turning off lights. When she passed the mantel, she paused. Up close, the elf's grin seemed sharper, like it knew a joke she didn't. "Stop it yourself," she muttered. "You're overtired." She went to bed. At sunrise, Emma's scream jolted everyone awake. Laura and Ben rushed into the kitchen, still groggy. Jingles was no longer on the mantel. He now sat on top of the refrigerator, perched neatly, legs dangling, head angled down toward the back door, as if he'd spent the night watching the deadbolt, watching the chain, watching for movement. "Mom, look!" Tyler pressed his face to the kitchen floor. "We didn't touch him, we swear." Laura opened her mouth to answer, to say something logical, something adult, but nothing came out, because there was something else, something she couldn't explain. The elf's felt hands, previously stitched together, were now slightly apart. Not ripped, not broken, just parted, like they'd moved on their own.
For the rest of the morning, everyone tried to act normal, or at least pretend they weren't staring at the refrigerator every few minutes. Ben kept insisting that one of the kids had moved the elf as a joke, but even he didn't sound convinced. Emma refused to eat breakfast unless the back door was fully locked. Tyler kept glancing over his shoulder like Jingles might leap down and whisper something in his ear. By noon, nerves settled just enough that Laura put the elf back on the mantel. She didn't like the way his painted eyes caught the light. From certain angles, they looked almost reflective, like real glass, like they were following movement. That night, she told herself she wouldn't check on it before bed. She checked anyway, and the mantel was empty. Her first instinct was to call for Ben, but something stopped her, a quiet, irrational fear that making noise would draw attention from whatever else might be awake in the house. She found Jingles sitting on the narrow table by the front door, positioned directly under the alarm keypad. His head was tilted toward the sensor on the wall, almost studying it. "Okay," Laura whispered. "Nope, no, not doing this." She picked him up by one stiff felt arm and shoved him into the hallway pantry, closing the door harder than necessary. The sound echoed through the house. The next morning, the pantry door was wide open. Not just open, propped, with a bottle of maple syrup wedged against the base to keep it from swinging shut. And Jingles sat neatly at the edge of the hallway rug, again, facing a point in the house no child would ever think about. This time, he stared straight at the vent near the floor, the one that led into the wall spaces and the old crawl channels running under the house, places no one had touched since the remodel, places that shouldn't matter to a holiday toy. "Why is he looking down there?" Emma asked, clinging to Laura's leg. No one answered. Ben forced a laugh that was more cough than humor. "It's a doll. It doesn't look anywhere. Someone moved it." But the kids shook their heads, both of them too pale, too serious for a Sunday morning. After lunch, Laura found the elf again, perched at the top of the basement doorframe, hands folded, gaze fixed downward at the locked handle. It was as if Jingles was mapping every entrance, every exit, every path into the house. "Ben," she said quietly, "why is he always watching the doors?" He didn't look up from his phone. "Coincidence." 3 times? 3 different doors? Yesterday the back, today the front, now the basement? Ben's jaw tightened, the way it always did when the past threatened to surface. "Drop it, Lau." She fell silent, but inside something cold unfurled. Because the basement wasn't just another part of the house. It was the one place Ben had never let her clean alone, the one place he checked himself every night before locking up, the one door he always kept bolted, with a key she'd never actually seen. Before she could say anything else, Tyler appeared in the hallway clutching a handful of alphabet magnets from the fridge. "Mom," he said, voice shaking, "you need to see this." He led them into the kitchen. On the refrigerator, the magnets spelled a single word: down. There were no tiny fingerprints smeared on the metal, no disturbed magnets around the word, just that one message, placed too neatly, too intentionally. And when Laura looked toward the basement door, she could have sworn Jingles' painted eyes were angled downward, straight at the locked handle again, watching, waiting.
The word down stayed on the refrigerator all afternoon, as if the magnets themselves had frozen in fear. Nobody touched them. Nobody even got close enough to breathe on the metal. The house felt tense, hollow, like it was holding a breath. Ben tried to ignore it, but every time he passed the fridge, his eyes flicked up at the message. Once Laura caught him staring at it with a look she'd never seen before, something between guilt and recognition. As evening settled, the cold seeped into the walls. The kids sat wrapped in blankets on the couch, watching cartoons too quietly. Jingles, after being moved again to the mantel just to keep him out of the way, seemed almost relaxed in his new perch, legs dangling, head tilted toward the hallway like he was waiting for someone to walk by. Around 9, Laura went to grab baking sheets from the cupboard above the stove. When she closed the door, she froze. The magnets had rearranged. Not the whole set, just the 3 letters from earlier. Now they formed a new word. Lock. "Ben," she whispered. But he didn't answer from the living room, so she stepped back, heart thudding. The basement door stood at the end of the hallway, its handle reflecting the warm kitchen light. Ben finally appeared behind her, rubbing his eyes. When he saw the fridge, his face changed, subtly, but enough. "Kids," he said, though his voice already knew the answer. "They were with me, both of them." For the first time since all this started, Ben didn't argue. He didn't laugh it off. He just stared at the basement door the way someone stares at an old wound they thought had healed. "Ben," she said carefully, "what happened down there when you were a kid?" He stiffened. "Nothing." But the lie was immediate, too quick to hide. Before she could push further, a sudden clatter snapped both their heads toward the living room. Emma screamed. They ran. The kids were huddled together on the rug, trembling. Next to the Christmas tree, no longer on the mantel, sat Jingles. His legs were crossed neatly, and in his felt lap lay a single refrigerator magnet. The letter C. "Mom," Tyler whispered. "He moved again. We didn't touch him. We swear." Laura gathered the kids, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. Ben walked slowly to the elf, crouched, and picked up the magnet from its lap. "Why the letter C?" Laura asked. Ben didn't answer. He stared at the tiny block in his hand like it meant something, something he'd hoped never to see again. Then Tyler pointed shakily toward the hallway. On the refrigerator, the word had changed one more time. Cold. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, faint and distant, came a soft, dragging sound, as if something below the house had just begun to move. The dragging sound faded as quickly as it came, leaving the house wrapped in a silence that felt wrong, like a missing heartbeat. Laura kept the kids close, their small hands cold and tense in hers. Ben stood in the hallway staring at the basement door, the magnet still clenched in his fist. "We're not going down there," Laura said. "Not tonight." Ben didn't argue. That scared her more than anything. They put the kids to bed together, lights on, doors cracked open. Emma asked if the elf could sleep outside in the trash bin. Laura said yes, absolutely yes. But when she went back to the living room, Jingles was gone again. Not in the kitchen, not on the mantel, not on the tree. They searched without touching anything, each corner feeling colder than the last. It was Laura who finally found him. The basement door stood open 2 inches, and Jingles sat on the top step, inside, facing upward, as if he'd climbed up from the darkness below. His tiny felt hands rested on his knees. His head was tilted back toward them. Behind him, on the dusty concrete step, someone had dragged a fingertip through the grime to form a shaky word. "You promised." Her breath hitched. "Ben, what is this?" He slammed the door shut so hard the frame rattled. His face had gone gray, almost waxy. "It's a prank, some stupid prank." "By who?" Laura demanded. "Your parents? The kids? Me?" Ben didn't answer. He walked to the sink, braced his hands on the counter, and bowed his head. His shoulders trembled once, barely, like he was fighting something back. That night, sleep felt impossible. The house kept making sounds it never had before. Faint taps in the walls, a soft creaking under the floorboards, a long exhale of cold air from the vents. At 3 a.m., Laura sat up in bed, convinced she heard whispering through the ductwork. By morning, she found Jingles in the one place she had prayed he wouldn't be. The basement again, but not the steps this time. The door, which she knew she'd locked, now hung wide open, and the elf sat cross-legged right on the threshold, staring inward into the dark. On the floor, just past him, in a pile of flour that had spilled from an overturned pantry container, were small finger-traced symbols. Not letters at first, just loops, lines, frantic swirls. But near the edge, clearer than the rest, 3 letters stood out. D-A-D. Emma began crying the moment she saw it. Tyler backed away slowly, shaking his head. Laura turned to Ben. "Tell me what happened down there," she said quietly. "Tell me what you promised." Ben didn't speak. He just stared at the flower on the floor, and for the first time he looked truly frightened. Not of the message, but of the basement itself. Ben avoided the basement the entire morning, moving around the house like a man trying not to step on landmines. The kids wouldn't leave Laura's side. Every creak of the floor made them flinch. The spilled flour with the word Dad still lay across the basement threshold like an accusation no one wanted to sweep away. By noon, Jingles had vanished again. They searched slowly this time, afraid of what they might find. The living room, the pantry, the kids' rooms. Nothing. It was Tyler who spotted him first. "In the closet," he whispered. The hall closet door was cracked open. Inside, nestled between winter jackets and shoe boxes, sat Jingles, perfectly upright, perfectly still. But he wasn't facing outward. He faced the back wall. Laura pushed the coats aside and froze. Behind them, near the floorboard, was a tiny notch in the drywall, a square outline just big enough to look intentional. "Ben," she called softly. He didn't want to see, she could tell, but he came anyway, jaw tight, eyes refusing to meet hers. When he looked at the notch, something inside him seemed to sink. "That wasn't there when we moved in," Laura said. "It was," he answered immediately, too fast. "Just painted over." "How do you know that?" "Because my brother and we used to hide things there." A chill rolled over her. "What kind of things?" He didn't answer. Tyler stepped closer, brushing his fingers over the square. The panel shifted inward with a soft pop. Behind it lay a narrow cavity between the studs, just a few inches deep, but filled with dust and brittle scraps of paper. Emma tugged on Laura's sleeve. "Mom, look." Among the scraps was a folded drawing, the paper yellowed at the edges. Laura unfolded it with trembling hands. It showed 2 boys, crudely drawn in marker, one taller, one smaller, and behind them a figure, long limbs, bent knees, staring eyes. An elf, almost exactly like Jingles, except taller, much taller. Ben paled. "I don't remember that." But Laura knew the tone of his voice. He did. Before she could press him, Emma gasped, "Mom, he moved!" They all turned. Jingles was no longer in the closet. He now sat on the kitchen counter, legs dangling over the edge, directly beside the spot on the wall that the remodel crew had patched years ago, a patch Ben insisted on supervising himself. The elf's painted eyes stared at it unblinking. "What's behind there?" Laura whispered. Ben didn't answer. He didn't need to, because all at once all the pieces clicked into place. The elf wasn't pointing at exits anymore. He was pointing at memory, at hiding spots, at secrets buried inside the walls of a house that was never as renovated as it looked. And each time he moved, he pointed closer. Closer to whatever the Hartleys had been pretending wasn't there. closer to whatever Ben had hoped would stay sealed forever. That night, the temperature inside the house felt wrong again. Colder in the hallways than outside. Colder near the vents than anywhere else. Laura wrapped the kids in blankets on the couch and turned on every light she could reach. She didn't dare look at the patched kitchen wall where Jingles had sat earlier. Ben avoided that spot entirely. Around 10, he said he needed air and stepped out onto the porch, staying there longer than made sense. When he came back in, his face looked drained, like he'd aged 5 years in an hour. "Kids, go to bed," he said quietly. Neither child argued. They didn't want to stay awake in this house any more than their parents did. Once the kids' doors clicked shut, Laura finally asked, "Ben, what was behind that patch before you sealed it?" He rubbed his hands over his face. "Just a hole. Old wiring channels. Nothing important." "Then why did Jingles point to it? Why do the drawings show—" "Because he's a toy," Ben snapped. "A toy someone keeps moving." But Laura noticed his hands shaking. Before she could respond, a sudden thud echoed through the house. Not from above, not from the basement, from the kids' hallway. They ran. Tyler stood frozen in his doorway, staring at his vent. The metal grate hung crooked, screws on the carpet like they'd been pushed from the inside. Inside the duct, just visible in the shadows, sat Jingles. His felt body crammed into the narrow metal shaft, his face turned outward, his porcelain eyes staring straight at the boy who used to sleep soundly in this room. "It was whispering," Tyler said, voice cracking. "Mom, it was whispering my name." Laura reached into the vent with trembling hands and pulled the elf out. His felt clothes were dusted with insulation. His little painted grin now looked sharp as glass. She carried him into the living room and dropped him onto the coffee table like something toxic. "We're getting rid of him tonight," she said. Ben shook his head. No, we can't." "Why not?" He didn't answer. So Laura stormed to the kitchen drawer, grabbed a trash bag, and returned, only to find the elf no longer on the table. He sat on the floor by the hallway instead, facing the kids' rooms again. And behind him, written directly on the hardwood in a trembling, childlike scrawl, was a single phrase. "I remember." Emma began sobbing. Tyler backed away until he hit the wall. Laura looked at Ben. "Who is remembering? Ben? Your brother? Something else in this house?" Ben didn't blink, didn't move, because he finally understood, and Laura could see it in his face. This wasn't about the kids. It never had been. The elf had come back to remind him. Laura had never seen Ben look the way he did after reading the words "I remember" on the hardwood. Hollow, cornered, like something old and heavy had finally caught up to him. He sat down on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if the boards themselves were accusing him. "Ben," Laura said softly, "you have to tell me, whatever happened, it's already inside this house." He shook his head. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." The kids watched from the hallway, small silhouettes clutching each other. The house felt too quiet, as if it were listening, waiting. Ben finally exhaled a shaky breath. "My brother and I used to play down there, in the basement. We weren't supposed to, but We did. There were crawl spaces from the old foundation, narrow ones. His voice trembled. He liked to hide in them. Laura felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. One day, Ben continued, we had a fight. Stupid kid stuff. He ran into one of the crawl spaces deeper than usual. It was dark. I followed him, tried to pull him out. He slipped, hit his head on a beam. He swallowed hard. He wasn't moving. The kids didn't breathe. Neither did Laura. I panicked. I dragged him farther in so no one would see us. I thought I'd come back, but I got scared and ran upstairs. By the time I tried to go back, he whispered, I couldn't find the right tunnel. Laura covered her mouth. Ben, my parents said he must have run away. They believed it, wanted to believe it, and I didn't correct them. I promised myself I'd tell the truth someday. I never did. A soft click echoed through the house. All of them turned toward the sound. The basement door had unlatched on its own. Not open, but letting out a draft of stale, icy air that curled across the hallway floor like smoke. On the living room rug, the elf now sat upright again, legs neatly crossed, hands folded. No one had touched him, and lying in front of him was a small object, something gray, dusty, familiar. A child's sneaker, too old and too small to belong to either of their kids. Emma whimpered. Tyler grabbed her hand. Laura crouched slowly and picked up the shoe. The rubber was cracked, the laces stiff with age. Ben, Laura whispered, this was in the walls or under the floor. He's showing us where your brother went, where he still is. Ben's face went pale. Before anyone could speak, a faint rhythmic sound drifted from the basement stairwell. Not dragging this time, not whispering. Knocking. Soft, even, patient. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps again. As if something beneath the house had been waiting decades for someone to finally listen. And now that the truth had been spoken aloud, the knocking didn't stop. Soft, measured, almost polite, like someone on the other side of a door waiting to be invited in. The kind of knocking a child might use when he's afraid of getting in trouble. It echoed up the basement stairs, threading through the cold air. Emma buried her face in Laura's shirt. Tyler clung to her sleeve, eyes wide, refusing to look at the basement door. The elf sat perfectly still on the rug, angled toward the sound as if listening. Ben took 1 step toward the basement. "Don't!" Laura whispered. "I have to," he murmured. "I should have gone down there years ago." "No," she said, grabbing his wrist. "Not alone!" But he gently pulled away, like a man walking toward a sentence he'd already accepted. The basement door creaked open wider, as if welcoming him. A cold draft swept through the hallway, flickering the lights. Ben stood at the top of the stairs. The knocking stopped. For a moment, the basement was silent. Then something scraped across concrete, a long, low drag, like furniture being moved, or like something shifting its weight. "Stay here," Ben said. Laura didn't listen. She followed him halfway down the steps, the air growing colder with each one. The smell changed, damp earth, old wood, a hint of rust. Not rot exactly, but something left too long in the dark. Ben reached the bottom and froze. The far wall of the basement, the one sealed behind new drywall years ago, had a crack running through it now. not large, but wide enough to see that something had pushed from the other side. Dust lay in a perfect arc below, as though the wall had flexed outward. Laura swallowed. "Something's behind that." Ben nodded, his jaw tight. "That's where the crawl space used to be." Before they could step closer, a sound echoed above them, a faint metallic clatter. They turned. The elf now sat perched on the railing at the top of the stairs, though neither of them had heard movement. His head was angled down at them, watching with those painted, glassy eyes. Laura's heart pounded. "He wants us to find it." "He wants me to," Ben whispered. He stepped toward the cracked wall. Laura followed, flashlight in shaking hands. Dust coated the floor, and in it, small marks. Not footprints exactly, but impressions. Narrow, childlike, leading to the crack. He hesitated, then reached for the wall. The drywall shifted under his hand. It moved inward. A space gaped open, narrow, black, and cold. The beam of Laura's flashlight caught the edges of old wooden supports, a tangle of cobwebs, and something deeper inside. A hollow. A small hollow. Her breath caught. Something lay far back in the gap, wrapped in shreds of denim and flannel. Too small, too still. Ben made a sound, not a cry, not a gasp, something rawer pulled from the center of him. But before he could reach inside, a new sound drifted from the hollow. Not knocking, not dragging, breathing. A soft inhale, a slow exhale, steady, alive, too close. Laura staggered back, flashlight trembling. "Ben, that's not your brother," she whispered. He stared into the darkness, tears streaking down his face. "Then what is it?" he choked. And inside the hollow, beneath the beam of dusty light, something shifted, like a body uncurling after a very long sleep. The shape inside the hollow moved again, slow, deliberate, too controlled to be an accident. Dust sifted down in a thin curtain. Laura grabbed Ben's arm, pulling him back from the opening. "Ben, we need to go," she whispered. But he couldn't look away. His breath hitched, fogging the cold air. If it's not him, then who was living in here? The breathing grew louder, not frantic, not pained, steady, patient, as if whoever was inside had been waiting for the chance to exhale freely again. Then something slid forward into the beam of the flashlight. Not a face, not a hand, a strip of flannel fabric, torn and filthy, still wrapped around what looked like the edge of a sleeve. Too small for an adult, too short to be Ben's brother now. He'd have grown, changed, aged. Unless growth never happened. Unless something else stayed in the dark instead. Laura stumbled back up a step. "Ben, that's not human." Before he could respond, a sudden metallic crash rang out from upstairs. Both of them whipped their heads up. Footsteps, soft, quick, scurried across the living room floor. The kids. Ben bolted up the stairs, Laura right behind him. They reached the living room in seconds. Tyler and Emma stood frozen near the Christmas tree, eyes wide and shining with fear. On the floor between them and the hallway lay Jingles, but for the first time since the Hartleys brought him home, he wasn't sitting. He was standing. Propped on stiff felt legs, leaning slightly forward, arms extended toward the kids, as if guiding them away from something, or warning them. "Mom," Tyler whispered. He said he wasn't alone. What do you mean, said? He whispered, Emma whimpered. From the vent. He said he stayed behind, and don't let him upstairs. Ben's face went pale. Upstairs. Already? A heavy thud shook the floorboards beneath their feet, directly under the living room. Then another. Slow, deliberate steps, coming closer to the stairs. The house seemed to tighten, every wall creaking as though holding its breath. Jingles toppled sideways as if shoved by an unseen hand. When he landed, something slipped from his felt grip and slid across the hardwood. A Polaroid photo, old, yellowed. In it, 2 young boys stood in the unfinished basement, Ben and his brother, smiling at the camera. But behind them, in the shadows, stood a third figure, tall, thin, bent at the joints, head cocked too far to one side, a long arm reaching toward the younger boy's shoulder. Neither boy seemed aware of it when the photo was taken. Ben stared at the image in horror. That thing, it wasn't in the crawlspace. It was already here, back then. Another thud shook the house. Then the basement door slammed shut on its own, so hard the wreath fell off and hit the floor. Laura grabbed the kids, heart racing. Ben, what's coming up those stairs? He didn't answer. He already knew. Whatever had lived in the walls all these years, whatever had whispered through vents and crawled through foundations, whatever the elf had been watching, tracking, warning them about, it wasn't done hiding anymore. The footsteps slowed on the basement stairs, each one pressing into the silence like a thumbprint. Laura held the kids close, their trembling bodies tucked against her sides. Ben stood between them and the hallway, fists clenched, face drained of all color. Something scraped against the door. Once. Twice. A long, dragging sweep. Then silence. Jingles lay on the floor where he had fallen, glassy eyes staring upward. For the first time, he looked less like a warning and more like a casualty, a broken tool after too many years of use. Ben stepped toward the basement door. "Don't," whispered Laura. He hesitated, but only for a moment. "If I don't finish this, it won't stop." He reached for the knob. Before he could touch it, the door clicked open just an inch, as if inviting him. Cold air rushed out, bitter, heavy, carrying a faint smell of damp earth and something older, something patient. A shape stood in the gap, not tall as in human, tall as in wrong, limbs bending where no limb should bend, shadow pulled thin like taffy, its head drooped sideways, joints hinging with slow, careful intention. Ben froze, the shape tilted, almost curious. And then it spoke. Not with a voice, with the same dry, papery whisper that had slithered through vents and walls. "You left him." Ben shook his head. "I was a kid. I didn't know." "You promised," the whisper rasped. Laura pulled the children back. The figure shifted, angling toward them. But then, unexpectedly, it stopped. Its head jerked toward the elf on the floor. Jingles, had moved again. Only an inch, but enough. One small felt arm pointed toward Ben, then downward, toward the basement, toward the truth the house had never forgotten. It wasn't the monster the elf had been tracking. It was Ben's guilt. It was the unfinished promise. And this thing had been feeding on it for decades. Ben inhaled sharply, stepped forward, and whispered, "I'm not running. Not anymore." He pushed the basement door fully open. The creature leaned back, shrinking into the dark, as if Ben's words were something it couldn't follow. Its outline thinned, stretching into shadow, dissolving into the hollow it had inhabited for so long. A final whisper brushed past them. "I stayed because you did." Then it was gone. The house exhaled, literally. A warm draft swept through the hall as if some pressure had released. The basement was just a basement again. No footsteps, no breathing, no knocking. Jingles fell onto his back, limp and ordinary, a doll once more. Ben sank to the floor, shaking. Laura knelt beside him. The kids crawled into their laps. Outside, wind raveled a loose gutter. Inside, the house grew still. Days later, the police removed the remains of Ben's brother. There were questions, statements, apologies 30 years late. But no one asked about what lived in the walls, and no one mentioned the elf. Laura boxed Jingles up the night after the funeral. She sealed the lid, taped it shut, and placed it in the garage with the recycling. The next morning, the box was gone. In its place sat a single Polaroid, a new one, a photo of the Hartley family sleeping peacefully in their beds. On the back, written in a child's shaky scrawl, "I watch what people hide." A cold breeze slipped through the garage. The house, quiet, warm, ordinary, seemed to listen.